So over the last couple of months, I've been building this tool called Clinic. Clinic is simple, straightforward appointments, tasks, and messages for doctors. And that message really seems to resonate with a lot of people. Today, in Building in Public, Episode 8, I want to talk a little bit about what simple means and why I think simple might not necessarily be the best thing to strive for. So simple is often the language I use because it's the language I've heard from a lot of physicians and clinicians who deal with EHRs. I think the world that we have designed in terms of consumer electronics and software, the likes of Apple or Dieter Rams or Tesla or any number of high-end technology company probably is going to make something that feels very simple and easy to use. And so the language that a lot of these physicians and clinicians use is like things like simple and easy and fast. But the problem with this language is what is simple to me or what is easy to me is not necessarily simple or easy to you or someone else. And so the language that is being used can be vague, subjective, and somewhat hard to understand if we don't do a little bit more digging. In the past, I've spent most of my time hearing simple and easy and fast and go, yeah, got it, let's make it simple. But the reality is that I think it's actually a little bit more complex than that and a little bit more nuanced. What I think a lot of people are getting at, and this is the reason that I think it's important to be clear about this, is that simple, easy, and fast are generally referring to removing friction. But removing friction where? Removing friction how? Removing friction can often mean a couple different things. Something is cumbersome or complicated or overwhelming, and so they might say, I want it to be faster or simpler or easier. And for the most part, these complaints really fall into kind of two categories of friction. Friction that exists because of the EHR they're using, essentially the issues with current products on the market, or there is friction because of the actual workflow is a challenging workflow to adapt to a computer, just in general. And there's a lot of things that could go wrong. There's a lot of complexity and kind of nuance. And so designing a single thing for that could seem to have a lot of friction involved. Now, what I think is actually really interesting is the blue circle is more fun to actually work on because that's actually, I think, where a lot of the true understanding of what a physician is trying to do comes into play. And I also think that where the overlap between these two things are, the green and the blue on the screen here, that's where the unique value prop for new solutions exists. Basically, if you can remove the friction from a workflow issue for a physician, and you can do it better than other EHRs, and you can document that or prove it or have testimonials that prove that, then you actually have a really, I think, strong chance to enter the market in a way that could be disruptive. But the problem that we get here is that context matters immensely in healthcare. Just the differences even between a physician who works in a primary care practice in a rural town versus a surgeon who works in a level 1 trauma center in a large city, it's too much to even really think about sometimes. There's so much difference between those two people that it's almost like they're on different worlds in some ways. But at the end of the day, when you think about it, they have generally the same goals. They have generally the same desires. They want to help people, they want to make people better, and they want to help people stay alive and live a healthy life. And so the challenge that we run into is that when we begin to talk about removing friction and overcoming all of these different issues, that the context of the practice type or the specialty or the environment of the practice plays a huge role in determining what is simple or what is easy for any individual clinician. The practice type, inpatient or outpatient, hospital or not, a specialty being orthopedics or OBGYN or neurology or primary care, the environment could be any number of things in terms of patient volume, patient kind of types that they deal with. Do they deal with lots of young people or older people? Do they deal with fast internet connection, slow internet connection? Do they have a lot of MAs and RNs to help? Are they doing it on their own? All of these factors play a huge role in determining what is going to be simple for a particular physician. For me, I've been talking to a lot of physicians who are trying to start or who do run their own practice. So I think that's where the best overlap in terms of existing EHR solution issues and the kind of the true workflow problems, that overlap is very, very evident for folks who have tried to run their own practice or who are doing so right now. They feel the pain very, very deeply. And so when I talk to these folks, there are a lot of different things that I'm looking for. And I want to give you an example. One example that I've had in recent weeks is an orthopedist. He's trying to start his own practice. He works in a large hospital right now. And he has talked to me about trying to start his own practice and all the things that he has evaluated and trying to figure out. And when we get to the EHR conversation, the thing that he keeps saying over and over, and he said this to me a bunch, is I want it to be simpler. I want it to be, just very simple to use. And I said, that's great. I love that. And in the past, I would hear that and I'd say, okay, good. Yeah, simple. Let's move on. But now, recently, in the last couple months, I've actually started just digging into what they mean by that, by what someone means when they say, I want it to be simpler. What does simple, and this is actually a really great opportunity to ask a question, which is, what does simple enable? Why is that good for you? And he talks a lot about the iPhone. He says, I want it to be just like the iPhone. And I say, okay, can you describe to me what the iPhone version of EHR is? And he says, it's only 3 things on the screen: appointments, the patient information, and the documentation. That's it. That's only 3 things I want on the screen at any given time. And this is really interesting because when I hear somebody who says, I have this kind of idea or this solution in my head, or I've tried to build a solution, I tend to try to get into like, what exactly were you trying to get to? What was the challenge that you were trying to solve for yourself? What was the problem there? And why was that the thing? Why was that the kind of result that you ended up with? So when someone says this to me, something like this, and they say, I've got this very clear understanding of what I want, I start going, okay, what does this actually enable? Again, I want it to be simpler. What does this version of simple enable for you? And this is what we started talking about. Simple is removing friction in clinical reasoning. As an orthopedist, he spends a lot of his time seeing roughly the same 15, 20-ish problems. And so if the faster that his software can be optimized, or the better his software can be optimized in terms of removing friction in what he has to find and how he finds it for any given appointment or patient type or problem type, then that is going to be simpler for him. Now, what was really great here was I asked, he kind of described to me like it's removing this kind of, it's helping me with my clinical reasoning. And I said, can you describe to me what clinical reasoning actually is? Like, what does that do? How does it work? Why is that the thing that's so important? And, he actually gave me this really great explanation, which is probably one of the best explanations I've heard in the last 5 or 6 years of talking to physicians. He talked to me about this process by which every physician goes through. When they start out, they're very much told to be a hunter-gatherer. So they go out and they find all the information they can about the patient, about the kind of the imaging or the labs or whatever has been done on the patient. And they use all of that and they bring it all together to present their plan or their diagnosis or whatever they think they need to do to help the patient. And then he said as they progress, they kind of go to a phase where they have a deeper understanding, and so they do that a little bit less, but they still have to do it somewhat. And then eventually a physician progresses to a point where they're kind of the expert level. And at this expert level, they kind of have the context and they understand, based on pattern recognition, what the problem is and what they need to do to solve that problem. And so as we began to go into this, I was just very blown away that by asking a very simple question, what does simple enable? We're now having this very deep discussion about what clinical reasoning is and what the problems and challenges that he faces with clinical reasoning and kind of representing that and how that actually needs to translate into the computer that he's using. This was a huge unblock for me. And I actually have somebody to thank for that. This article, Make It Easier is Not a Product Strategy, by a gentleman named Pavel Samsonov, has been a game changer for me in terms of understanding what actually easier or simple or faster means. Because again, they're subjective kind of personal terms. And so this is the article. It's on the UX Collective. I won't go into all of the details for it. They'll be in the description, so please, please, please go read it and give him some love. This is a fantastic article. I cannot understate that enough, that it has been super life-changing for me. I reference it at least once a month. But basically, what Pavel talks about in this article is that make it easier is actually an absence of a product hypothesis. Because when we say make it easier, or in this case, make it simpler, we actually don't maybe fully understand what we're trying to actually do. and why that's important and what that's going to impact, what the outcome is going to be there, both for the user or the customer and the business that you're working for. And so he has this really fantastic template that he uses, and I actually like have a screenshot of this saved to my computer so I can reference it all the time. I bring in every Figma file that I work in and all this kind of stuff. And basically what he says is like there are these three kind of hypotheses that you should generate: a problem, a business impact, and a solution hypothesis. That when you understand the context and you understand the behavior that leads to a particular goal, then you can identify what the friction is, and that if you overcome that friction, you're going to improve a certain result or lead to an objective. So the solution that you propose should do those things. So instead of me sitting here saying, hey, my EHR is going to be simple, it's going to be simple and straightforward, I can actually be a little bit more specific. I could say something like, the problem hypothesis: during a clinical consult, pre-charting requires too many clicks and screen transitions, this kind of interaction overload. And it eats up this visit time and clinician mental load. And so the business impact of solving that problem is going to be that we're going to have a differentiated product that physicians actually like to use. And the solution to that is a solution I have proposed on a number of occasions, but we could almost plug and play different ideas here. A modular approach to pre-charting, some kind of module system that lets them kind of summon the information they need when they need it, will help overcome that information, that interaction overload, and it will lead to a differentiated product. It will be a feature, it'll be a thing that it makes the process simpler by the subjective standard, but in a specific world, it makes this problem of mental load and visit time due to interaction overload, it means that those things will be solved and we will have a differentiated product. And this is kind of what that looks like if you're not familiar. You could kind of envision a lot of these on the screen. What it comes down to, and this is kind of the whole reason that I made this video, is that simple is a hook. It's good messaging, it's good marketing, it might be a good brand, but it's not the strategy. It's not the reason or not the way that we're going to solve problems. We can't just sit here and say it's going to be simple and say, yes, simple. Yeah, it's going to be simple. Don't worry, it'll be simple. We have to be more specific. We have to be more targeted. If this was interesting to you, I'd love to know more about that and why. If this is helpful in your own work, I'd love to hear about that as well. Or if you disagree or have other ideas, please feel free to share them. Until next time, peace.